Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London, and today I'm looking at a book which has come to us from Wildy, Simmonds and Hill Publishing. It's an important book and one that I found quite curious because it's called Digital Assets and Probate, written by James Normington as a practitioner's guide. It's only a short paperback, it's this one here. You can see it, there's the spine and then there's the back. It's a cheap book in terms of cost, it's not expensive. It's got a nice little index at the back which is by page numbering, and then you've got the actual text, 150 pages, some appendices, in fact 3 in total. At the front you've got the basic of the book there. Then you've got a nice dedication. I always like the dedications, a lot of work goes into these books. We never review books that we don't like, there's no point. This book was published in 2023. You've got a list of table of cases, various other ones split into parts. Part 2 is a glossary, then general considerations, and pre-death issues and so forth, and post-death issues to deal with that side of it. And then the appendices at the back. And it deals with a lot of very modern stuff, cryptocurrencies, social media and so forth. Tables of cases, very few of them, but there are a number. Tables of statutes, again, a few. Statutory instruments. And then the European legislation there. Then what you've got is HM Revenue and Customs manuals, which is quite interesting. And then you've got a general introduction, which talks about the English legal system and the concept of probate. And it goes back a bit, but as you can see, you've got footnoting at the bottom there, and the book runs through in much the same vein. You've got the paragraph numbering, which you can see at the sides there. You've also got various documents which are highlighted, dealing specifically with what happens to your digital assets after you have died. And I think, again, it's an important area for many people to think about in a modern era. It's not something that my parents would ever have thought about, but it's something that I certainly would have to think about. So what do we say about the book? I've given it a title, A Dead Person's Digital Assets. What happens next? And that's really the question, because what a book. It's an ideal companion for the busy probate practitioner in the 21st century who needs a better understanding of digital assets when advising clients, drafting wills or administering estates. As I say, in this short review, what I'm going to do is mention that, as with all Wildy titles, this book is written in very much of an accessible style. It's certainly a very useful reference guide for people in this area of law. It's a new area to me and will be to many other people. So the book itself, this little paperback, will be useful for both new and experienced probate practitioners who are dealing with issues which include the following regular questions which are asked, and this is all part of the main blurb. It's actually on the back of the book there, but I'm going to go through it because these are the questions that are answered in the book. That is, what is a digital asset and how would you define it? Who deals with digital assets in probate situations? How does inheritance tax apply to digital assets? And what happens if you ignore the digital assets of a client's estate? And what steps should be taken to secure digital assets post-death? And what should clients be asked about concerning their digital assets and their behaviours, and what should they not be asked about? Those are the sorts of questions that are being put forward in the book. And I'll mention the introduction again in a minute, but let me explain first of all that James Normington, who wrote this book, is a barrister from New Court Chambers. And what he's done is he's taken a range of subjects in the context of probate, from social media and the taxation of cryptocurrencies. Not my favourite type of currency, I have to say. I think it's a criminal charter personally, but that's a different matter. But it looks at the taxation of the cryptocurrencies as they currently stand, to the digital executorship which takes place, and the securing of digital devices. Because clearly, once a person has died and cannot therefore be involved, it's up to the executors and those afterwards, personal representatives or whatever, to try to sort out what has been left. And it's an area which is going to become much bigger as we go through this 21st century, because we believe that this book itself, in fact, can have great use made of it as a form of mitigation of risk when it comes to what solicitors actually have to do and what they're faced with in terms of the digital assets upon the death of a client. And of course it really also looks at the role of legal representatives, and James has actually covered that, I think, very well indeed. It also gives us as practitioners, and in fact I think the general readership would be interested in this, specimen draft clauses, precedents and a sample digital assets questionnaire for clients, which I think is the most useful resource. And the guide, of course, and it is a practitioner's guide primarily, sets out a useful glossary of relevant terms which are commonly encountered in practice. Now, I think that was very, very helpful, because to me, as someone who's much older, I found a lot of it very confusing, and that did, in fact, help me immensely, the glossary. So I therefore believe that the book will be helpful to both the more experienced person involved in the digital world and, of course, the IT beginner like me in that sense. Now, the paperback edition was published at the end of last year. That's the 20th of December 2022. There it is again. That's the front. Then there's the side. And then there's the back. And if you just go into it, drafting matters and sample will clauses, this will be, I think, of much greater help to solicitors than members of the bar. But what I did find with the appendices is you've got useful draft clauses in Appendix 1, an example of a client questionnaire, again extremely helpful, in Appendix 2, and then for Appendix 3, when I get to it, an example of a letter of wishes. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at what the person who's just died, what is his wish, what does he wanted to do? And that basically covers this digital area, which has hitherto not really been looked at all, if you think about it. Now, let me just talk briefly about the beginning of the book, because I mentioned the glossary. There's the glossary, which starts, you can see it starts with blockchain. Which you've probably heard of and probably don't really know what that means, but it explains it. And it runs all the way through the various different glossary names. You can see how it runs through there. Again, very helpful. And vlog, a video blog, for instance. All of this information probably many people may know it, but many people may not know it. And that's why it's quite useful. And of course, the point that I would make is in the introduction, James says the legal system in England and Wales and the concepts of probate have evolved through the centuries, yet the underlying concepts and principles would still be familiar to both Dickens, Mr. Jaggers, and of course the 18th century jurist Sir William Blackstone. So you're really bringing in quite a large number of different types of people. He witters on about the Havisham estate in Great Expectations, but he makes some important points. And of course what he says is throughout the course of this book we'll look at each of the more common elements of our digital life, the challenges and pitfalls that each element raises, and the most appropriate avenue to deal with each element. And I think that is the beauty of this book. I'm sure this is not the last we've heard of this area of what I think is very much developing law, but a very big thank you to Wildy for actually deciding to publish this, and to James Normington in particular for the work he's put in, because I found it a fascinating short read. It's not a particularly long book to read at all, but it was extremely helpful. So a big thank you to everybody concerned in its production. I enjoy reading it. Bye-bye.